when I talked about our vision with Safe Community Secure Ontario, our dual policing model, integrated service delivery is how we do that. So when you see an OPP officer out in your community policing, they could be doing one of two things. They could be doing a provincial obligation, or they could be doing a municipal obligation. So when they're doing that, we track that activity and it goes towards our billing. So if they're doing a provincial activity, your municipality is not billed for that. So if they're doing a municipal call for service, you are billed for that. So the OPP, integrated service delivery, we do it for many reasons. We do it to make things more cost effective so that we're able to police the province without having a detachment for every municipality or every sector that we have to police. We partner with municipalities like yours so we can accomplish that and also make it more cost effective for your municipality as well. So when we have those officers out doing that dual mandate, we track their activities using what we call a daily activity reporting tool, which we refer to as a DAR in our world. And what that does, every time a police officer does an action, whether it's a traffic stop or goes to calls for service, that is tracked through this daily activity reporting. It's very accurate, and in today's world, we have all this technology that makes it trackable by GPS, our dispatchers, and everyone in between. So a very accurate tool to make sure that our billing is accurate. Let's go to the next slide. So this slide here is our overall budget. I'm going to let Janet go into this, and our provincial budget, which is our provincial activities and our municipal. I'll let Janet speak to that and go over the budget quickly.
Okay, so the slide you see before you now is a wheel, and it really depicts the OPP's budget in 2020, 2021. On the right-hand side of the screen, we see municipal responsibilities, and these are those responsibilities, the obligations that Rob spoke to a moment ago. And these responsibilities are provincial responsibilities, includes aircraft enforcement, includes our covert operations, specialized investigations, our specialty deployment teams, tactics rescue. It also includes Indigenous policing and auxiliary policing and community safety. So all of these services are delivered everywhere that the OPP delivers policing services at zero cost recovery to municipalities. So the things on the right-hand side of the page here are all delivered at no cost to a municipality. It's not included in the billing model. On the left-hand side of the screen, we see municipal policing resources. And these are the funds that the OPP supports the government in recovering from municipalities for OPP services. And so the funds recovered from municipalities include funding for things like frontline officers, supervision, civilian support staff. It also includes things like vehicles, radio and equipment, quality assurance, prisoner guards, training, and such. So those activities are recovered, the costs for those activities are recovered from municipalities using that very important DAR data that Rob mentioned a moment ago. That's how we have people sift through that data and sort it into these categories so that we can recover costs accurately and fairly from our municipalities. Next slide, please. And so how do we do that? We use something called the OPP billing model, and that allows us to sort out, not only distinguish municipal and policing responsibilities, but allows us to sort out types of service within that billing model. The billing model divides bills up to into three main categories. The first is base services, and base services includes all of our proactive policing services, legislated activities. It includes officer training, administrative duties. These base services are delivered equally across every municipality the OPP polices at an equal cost per household. So the base cost right now is roughly $165 per household, per property rather, that the OPP polices. That could be thought of as the more fixed component of the bill. To the right, we see calls for service. And this is the reactive policing. Someone picks up the phone, calls the police for service for whatever the situation may be. It can include crime calls, motor vehicle collisions, general calls for services. And so these calls come in and they're divided into categories, and those categories have time standards. And Rob's going to get into that in a little bit. But basically, these calls come in and they're divided into primary categories that use time standards so that we can bill accurately only for the services and time spent by officers to respond to those calls. So this could be thought of as the more variable component of the bill. Then we have other additional costs, another component of the bill, and these are billed on specific usage. That includes things like overtime, accommodation expenses, court security, any enhancements a municipality may have, prisoner transportation, and cleaning and caretakers. So those are the three main components of a bill. And on the next slide, we'll take a look at South Huron's bill. So at the top, we see the base services that I mentioned. And you'll see in the middle, there is a property count of 5,200 properties. That's multiplied by that flat rate that I mentioned of $165 per household to get your total on the right for base services. The next section is calls for service. Sorry, same slide. Thank you. The next section is called calls for service, and this is that variable component of the bill. Provincially, there is a total of 183 million calls for service. When we look at South Huron's proportion of that provincial total, it comes to 0.5% of the provincial total. And so when the math works out, we'll show you those calls for service details in another slide or two, works out to roughly $178 per property for calls for service in South Huron. The next section would be the other costs, and that includes overtime, prisoner transportation, accommodation, and cleaning services. And we see that those items are added to give us a grand total of $366.53 per property in South Huron. So that's a quick breakdown of the bill. That's the per household cost, and then the total cost for the municipality for the year for 2024 is shown at the bottom. It's approximately $1.9 million. And now I'm going to bounce it back over to Rob here.
Perfect. Next slide's already up. So I refer to this as my favorite slide because this is the calls for service section. The part that Janet mentioned isn't so much your fixed cost, but what additional costs you can see on your bill. And that's responding to calls for service. So as Janet mentioned, every time somebody responds to a call, that is categorized in one of these billing groups. So this is page 5 of your billing statement. So on page 6 through, you'll see all these categories with every single call that your municipality had listed, and they'll be all underneath each one of these categories. And I apologize if this is repetitive for some of you that are already billing model experts, but for those of you that haven't seen the bill before, this is how you would be able to look at what's happening in your municipality. So this calls for service is a quick glance. And what's really neat about this year's bill in 2024, they do this same chart, but for the province right below it. So you can actually see what provincial calls for service are and what categories are high across the province versus your own municipality. So each call for service that is answered is placed into one of these groups. If you notice right off the top, you can see a group like Operational 1. These are 4-year averages. So in 2024, they're based off of the calls from 2019 to 2022. And then we have an estimate for this year. So Operational 1, you'll see in 2019, it was 1,028 calls. So first thing I would say, if I was looking at this, I've never seen a billing statement before. Wow, that's a high number. Well, it's very normal to see Operational 1 as the high number because these are the type of calls that OPP responds to that are non-criminal or everyday disputes, things that don't usually go further than that initial call or follow-up. So across the province, you'll see operational as maybe the number 1 for call categories. If you can see there, you can also see there's been a decrease over the years. So in 2019, 1,028, this 4-year average 894. So a good reduction there. You can see next to that, you'll see average time standard as 3.8 in that same category. So what that means is once they look at the total province for all Operational 1 calls for service, they do an average time that it takes an officer to complete that call right across the province. And that number for 2024 is 3.8. This is reevaluated every year. So these are looked at annually to ensure that the time standards stay consistent with our times. So for operational 1, 3.8. And this works very well for consistency, because if, say, an officer went to an operational 1 type call, let's just use a domestic dispute that's non-criminal, and it took them 7 hours, you wouldn't be billed for 7 hours. You'd be billed for the average time standard, which is 3.8. So again, it's about averages, and it keeps it consistent so that when you're budgeting and you're putting things together as council, you're not looking at high peaks or low valleys for your budgeting. OPP is always trying to improve as well. So if you can see right below that, there's operational 2. So we found that when we were doing a lot of these operational calls, some of them didn't take 3.8 hours. We had another category where, something like, I'll use an example of a false alarm, where it's a call that can be answered very quickly, maybe under an hour, maybe an hour and a half, where an officer drives to a location, checks a premise, and they're done. So we started a second category called operational 2. But if you look at the average time standard for operational 2, it's 1.5 hours, not 3.8. So we're trying to, I guess you could say, keep this efficient, so to speak, as to what it takes to answer a call for service. The other reason I really like this slide as well is it also gives you a good snapshot of what's happening in your community. So if you look at, for example, property crime, you have in 2019, you have 340 occurrences. And then you can see over 2020, 2021, and 2022, you've got a decline. So as a detachment commander or somebody running at a detachment, this can give them a quick snapshot of where their resources need to go. So in this, you can see that they've had a decline. So they're doing a great job trying to reduce property crime. So we have that decline showing there. And then you can also see what's higher, what's lower. So you can look at violent crime, traffic, all these things to kind of determine where things need to go with your municipality. I'll leave it at that because I could talk a lot about this, which I already have. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Next slide is basically a historic snapshot of what your municipality's been paying over the last 4 years plus on the billing model. And I put this slide in here because this is also a good snapshot of what's available to you online at opp.ca. For those who haven't been on opp.ca, if you do go on there, you can go into the search and put Municipal Policing Bureau, and that'll take you to our section of the website. And in that section, we have webinars, we have tools like these where you can put in your municipality, see all your information. We have calls for service calculators where you can change your calls for service and see how that affects your bill. And we also have tools where you can compare yourself to other municipalities. So if you look at the second chart on that page, I know it's small, but what I did with this one is I went into that tool where you can do OPP municipal policing costs and compare to other municipalities. So I put in Huron detachment, which gives all the municipalities in your catchment, and it shows what everyone's paying per property cost. It shows if they're a section 10 agreement or a 5.1 agreement, and property counts and whatnot. So everything's public and out there to be seen and compare. A lot of times municipalities may say, well, we're doing this here in the West region. What about over in East region in a municipality the same size and demographics and whatnot, geographic size? So you can do comparisons right across the province. So I'll go to the next slide, which brings us to our OPP contract expiry options. So as we spoke, your OPP agreement is ending at the 31st of December, 2023. We do have this lingering thing called the CSPA, which I'm sure you're all aware of, where it's supposed to be coming into legislation and it will eliminate policing contracts. So in the meantime, before that comes into play, the ministry has given us many options here. They're all listed across the top. The first option, what they're allowing is an extension of the agreement for up to 2 years, which means we can do what they call an amending agreement, which is the exact same terms, just a different date. It could be a year later or 2 years later, which would remain everything the same except for the date. And it would also expire if the CSPA came into play. So it'd be one or the other, same as your existing agreement. The second option, if you wanted something more long-term, you can do a full renewal of your contract, which can go up to 6 years. So anything from 3 to 6 years. If you choose a amending agreement for an extension or a renewal, you can simply just do a bylaw. send that to our office, marking the change of date. We'll put together a new contract for you and send it off for signature. So either way, basically works out the same. Third option is to revert to a section 5.1 non-contract arrangement, which is no contract, basically the future of what will happen when the CSPA comes out. So it'll just be simply a letter to our municipal policing bureau stating that you want to revert to a 5.1 agreement. There'll be no contract. It just has to be on letterhead, and we'll just continue on. How does that affect you versus a contract? At this time, you don't have any enhancements, so that wouldn't be a factor. The main reason people go with a contract are for enhancements. And secondly, some of the grants that are available through the ministry require to have a Section 10 agreement. So if you don't have any grants that's going to affect, and there's no enhancements or there's no future prospect of doing grants, it would just simply be that that notification to us, and it's outlined here how that flows either way. So a little bit to think of. I'll touch base with you later after this meeting, obviously, and send you some written options, maybe a copy of an amending agreement or whatever. I'll talk to whomever would like to speak to me, and we'll do that. And I'll just go to the next slide here, and I'll get Janet to talk a bit about the CSPA.
Okay.
Not that there's much for right now.
So the Community Safety and Policing Act was introduced in 2019, but is yet to be proclaimed and put into effect. When it does, we are not sure exactly when that will be. We're told right now the ministry is aiming for spring of 2024. There have been a number of deadlines that have been pushed back. We're not sure how this one's going to go. As it stands right now, they're aiming for spring of 2024. Whenever it comes into effect, as Rob mentioned, it will nullify all current contracts, and it will essentially repeal the current Police Services Act and replace it with the new CSPA. Another change with the CSPA is it will eliminate current police service boards and police advisory committees and introduce what we call OPP detachment boards. And there will be at least one OPP detachment board for every OPP detachment. There are regulations around the composition of those boards, and I understand that the ministry has been in touch with a lot of municipalities already about how that will look for each individual municipality. The OPP is outside of that process, so the correspondence between the CSPA and the ministry is direct, and the OPP is outside of that. And it will eliminate the contracts, as mentioned.
The next slide, I always say this is the most important slide because it's my contact information. So, whatever didn't absorb tonight, please call me. That's my cell phone number down there. Sometimes when you call a bigger organization like the OPP, there's all these prompts to hit the next, and it seems like you never get there. Well, that's a direct line to me. So feel free to call it. Just tell me who you are, and I will help you the best that I can with any questions. If you think of anything between now and then. And then right now we can just open it. If there's any questions now that Janet or I could help with, we're welcome to them.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from members of council? Councillor Neeb, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Mayor Finch, and apologies for the really big question. But this comes up every year when we're talking about our contract and the base service and the calls for service. I'm just wondering, is there anything going on around the province in municipalities that are working towards lowering their calls for service? And if so, what are some ways that we could be proactive to lower those calls for service and lower our costs?
Yeah, that is a great question. And obviously with speaking to your detachment commander, that could give you a lot more insight, but I can give you a few examples right now of things I've noticed that have particularly impacted calls for service. Number one being mental health crisis teams that are out there now. I've seen it in the detachments that I've worked in, the great relationships between the hospitals and police going out and doing what I call proactive engagement with people who are in crisis. So that's a big one, because sometimes, like just from personal experience working in a smaller detachment, sometimes we could see a call from the same person 4 or 5 times a day, where if you have somebody proactive like that, they can go out there and curb those calls. So, that's just one thing that they're doing. Other things that they're doing, I can give you an example of 911 call diversion. Before, years ago, when I was working as a patrol officer, if we got a 911 drop call, we would have to go to that area and check the area for hours sometimes, it felt like, to make sure that there wasn't an issue. But now with the new technologies out there, they're doing a 911 diversion program where we're actually not having to respond at all to those calls. And they're coming right off the board where we don't have to pay for those at all or cost recover for those. So we have our online reporting tools where people can call in and do online reporting. We have collision reporting centers, quite a few things. And we actually have an efficiencies chart on our website, opp.ca, if you get a chance to go on there. I know sometimes it can be tough to navigate some of these websites, but lots of great things happening. And maybe I can get the detachment commander to talk about that at a different time for you.
Okay, thank you. Follow up, Mr. Lee?
No, thank you very much.
Thank you much. Councillor, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation. I noticed and with the documents that our cost is dropping around 100,000 this year. And based on, I think, a 4-year average, it looks promising with 2019 soon to drop off, which was a high and hopefully a high year, and 2020, 21 and 22 are significant lower, and our for calls for service are dropping. So hoping that we, have a good 2023 here, and we'll see another drop next year. I guess, so that's first comment. The other comment is when I look at the cost per property compared to our other detachments in the area or other municipalities in the area, in this catchment area, anybody with a section 10 is significantly higher per cost right at the moment, significantly higher. 383 for us for 2023, and Godrich at 581 and Central Huron at 383, and there's some significant reductions for the section 5. I guess that's just a recognition that we need to talk about, I guess, when we go to talk about our agreement. But is the major difference there is the couple things: the Police Services Board and the just the grants for having access to ride programs and things like that. Is that the main difference for that extra cost per property?
It's a difficult question to ask because I don't know all your particulars about your municipality, but I can tell you this: whether you are a 5.1 agreement or a section 10 contract, the cost is the same. So what it comes down to is many things. It comes down to calls for service, it comes down to property counts, it comes down to a lot of factors of why a bill comes out. And I can get a more detailed bill for you as well, maybe send you an email after with a more detailed breakdown than what's available in your billing statement. I can give you a base service. I think it's already in there anyways, of the base service and everything, what it breaks out to. But it's a little more complex than just being a 5.1 agreement or a section 10 contract. That doesn't relate any cost difference to you.
Okay, thank you. And if you do send an email, could you send it to our CEO?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just let
transparency.
Janet add a comment to that
Go
as
ahead,
well.
Janet.
I just wanted to add that these figures do not include grants, so they're exclusive of grants. And what was the other thing you had mentioned? The grants and
Detachment.
So the Police Service Board costs,
Yes,
I guess
thank you.
that would be extra in addition.
yes, none of those costs are included in the figures you have in front of you. So they're calculated the same way using the same billing model.
So to be fair, then somebody with a 5.1 section 5.1 that wants ride checks or whatever, there's an additional cost per property for those, as far as like if they were a 5.1 and still wanted, like section 10, we're allowed to have those ride checks still, right, with the section?
Yeah,
10?
so ride programs, just to be clear, that's part of proactive policing. So that's included in your base service. We do ride programs all the time. It's part of what the OPP does. However, sometimes municipality will say, you know, what you've been doing is great, but we'd actually like more ride checks. So they like to get the grant so that they see officers out there more often than what is, you know, operationally planned, so to speak. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And what would be the grant amount? Do you know that offhand?
I do not know that offhand.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Deputy, you have something? Go ahead, please.
I do believe the grant amount is $8,800.
That's what I thought, it was around 8,000. Thank you. Any other questions at this time?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for the presentation. I see here this, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that $700 per household now that we're talking?
I'll just go back. Bear with me 1 second. Your total is $366.53 per household. And the provincial average right now across the province is about $355.
Okay. So would it cost as much to patrol 100 acres of soybeans as it would for a police in an urban area? Like, is there any?
Well, farmland's not included. So if you have a vacant field, we don't charge per property on that.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Councillor Dietrich. Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. Well, thank you very much for your presentation tonight. It was very well done, and we do appreciate all the OPP do for us. And as you know, I was on the OPP for 30 years, so I know how the system works, or it did work, and we do appreciate the advancements. And we're very thankful for all you have done. Thank you.
Perfect. And thank you very much for having us. And again, if there's any questions, feel free to reach out. I have my number at the last slide.
Great, thank you very much. Ms. Masua Carlson, recommendation, please.
The South Huron Committee of the Whole receives a delegation of OPP Municipal Policing Bureau Billing and Contract Overview as presented by Sergeant Rob Griffin and Janet Fever.
A mover, please. Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Neeb. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? And that carries with 6. Thank you. Thank you very much, Officer Sip. And 4.2, we welcome Francis Valou from the BRA, Blue Water Recycling Association. Good to see you, Francis. Francis is a good friend for many municipalities across the region. So feel free to start whenever you're ready.
It's a bit of deja vu, you know, because on the weekend I was out at a Fright Night event in Sarnia and I saw somebody just like you talking just like you.
Would that be my
But he
twin
was from
brother?
Forest.
Would that be my twin brother?
Yes, it was.
He hasn't mentioned that yet.
He will. We had a chat.
I'm sure he will. Mr. Schramm has met him also. Bob, where are you? There. Bob's met him. Yep. Thanks. Okay, go ahead.
Good. I was told that you were looking for an update as far as what's happening with the Blue Box program. And so I've come out to hopefully deliver that for you. Essentially, for those of you who might not be aware, the province passed a regulation called the Blue Box Regulation back in June 3rd, 2021, that would see the current Blue Box program move over from being the responsibility of municipalities to one that's goes under the responsibility of producers, the ones who produce the printed paper and packaging. Under the program, we have a transition period that started July 1st of this year, where a third of the province was converted to move over to full producer responsibility. Next year, 2024, another third of the province moves over. And finally, in 2025, the last third of the province moves over so that producers will be fully responsible for the Blue Box program in Ontario by January 1st, 2026. In this area, every member of the association, of which you are one of them, is transitioning, if you want to call it that, on April 1st of 2024. And so at that point, in theory, the municipality is no longer responsible for the Blue Box program operationally and financially. Okay, so the cost of the Blue Box will drop off of your responsibility. Now, like everything else, it's never quite that clear, and that so there's always exceptions to that. And so the Blue Box program that the producers are taking over is for residential properties. It does not include any ICI sector, so institutional, commercial, industrial. So those remain your responsibility as you've been providing that service, and that will continue past that. So that's something we have to consider now. But I guess more present, I guess, would be the services themselves. What will happen? What might change? I can report to you that the association, acting on your behalf and 19 other municipalities, for the last year and a half, have been negotiating with the producers to be their service provider for the services. And we have reached an agreement that will see the association continue services locally for the next 9 years. So as far as on April 1st, 2024, it's going to be pretty boring because nothing's going to happen, because we're going to continue to collect the materials at the same frequency with the same containers on the same days, the same list of materials, and that will just continue as usual, except as of that date, you won't pay anything for the residential services. You will continue to pay for the commercial side. In your case, right now, if I remember right, that's about 278 bins in the community. So it represents about 5.85% of everything you pay. That portion would continue as part of a service as you continue to provide those. Now, as it stands right now, the producers are allowing us to collect that material with the current material that we collect now. So again, no changes, stays on the same routes and everything stays the same. But as of January 1st, 2026, we won't be allowed to do that unless something changes. There's always a possibility, and we're lobbying for that to happen. But right now, as it stands today, they've been made quite clear that as of January 1st, 2026, we can still continue to collect that stuff, but we just can't put it in the same truck as yours. So we'd actually have to send a special truck just to collect those 288 bins or 78 bins that you have in town. That's certainly, we don't anticipate that to be a problem. Costs may be different at that point, but we have a bit of time between now and then to figure things out, and hopefully they'll come to their senses and realize it just makes sense to just continue collecting it together and take the credit and kind of things. So but otherwise, yeah, your materials, your frequency, your containers, your service, the trucks, everything stays the same. As of 2026, the obligations for the producers changed a little. At that point, you're probably going to see an expansion of the list of materials acceptable in the Blue Box program. So some materials, that list hasn't been defined yet, but some materials that we expect will be added at that point, things like cartons or Tetra Paks, maybe some styrofoam, more flexible plastics, things like that will likely be added at that time. And the other thing is that their obligation at that point is to only provide service on a bi-weekly basis. So it is a possible that they'll come back to us at then and say, in weekly communities, we want you to cut service to bi-weekly, and that's the service we're going to provide. They haven't told us that, they haven't asked for that, but it's written in the regulations. So I would warn you that that's probably going to happen. Okay. Having said all that, the driving force behind all those changes is the goal for the province to divert more waste. And this really came about when the province came to the municipalities and said, listen, we're not doing a good enough job diverting organics. And so they were moving towards a producer responsibility system for all materials across the province. But if they were to go after the producers of food, they'd have to go after all the farmers. That's kind of a non-starter politically, so that died there, but they wanted municipalities to take it over. And the municipalities at that point really said, listen, we already are taking care of a lot of things, including the Blue Box right now. If you want us to do that, you got to do something there. And that's the compromise they came across. We'll give the Blue Box to the producers, but we're hoping the municipalities will step up and do organics. So right now there's some statements in place, a policy statement from the province to implement organics collection across the province. In your situation, and actually the situation of all our members at this point, you have no obligation to introduce a program because they have limits as far as number of households and the density of households and things like that. And so the lowest tier where you're required to have a green bin program, for example, is 20,000 population. So you're not there. We have a couple of municipalities that are in that range, but they don't meet the density requirement. And so there's no one required to do that. You're only required to provide composters or digesters or something like that, or make them available for your residents, which you already do that through the association. So your obligations are met there. But, if you're looking to do something different, certainly there's actually more organic material than there is Blue Box material out there. So you could have serious impact on your landfill to expand its life. removing organics from your landfill reduces leachate and reduces odors from the landfill, and putting it to good use. So it's something to consider. Okay, you don't have to, but it's an option. You probably should look at it. Beyond that, I mean, there's different reports that have come out in recent months. In Ontario right now, our disposal capacity sits at 10 years. We have less than 10 years left, and technically we'll be out of capacity for landfills in the province. There's some expansions that are in the works, but nowhere close to being approved at this point. I know you guys are sitting in a good position right now where locally you've got capacity, but as others shut down, you might get a lot of friendly people coming visiting you, I guess. Might be looking for options. So something to consider. And beyond that, there's promotion to move producer responsibility programs towards other materials that we're not dealing with now, things like mattresses, carpets, other textiles, different things like that, that there's potential for that to happen. And AMO is pushing that right now. Okay. So in a nutshell, that's what's going on. So I'd rather have maybe a discussion or questions if people are looking for.
Certainly. Any questions for Francis? Councillor Neeb, go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation. And just when you're talking about the upper limit of where municipalities are required to undertake organics, if a number of municipalities were to band together within, Huron County,
Yeah.
could that be an option then that organics could be covered, or is it more the geographic size that it just becomes so too large of an area to undertake that?
Yeah, no, I mean, the association itself has offered organics collection to any of its members. Last year we started that, and it was part of our plan all along since we did our last operational review in about 2004. When we launched the automated collection program with the wheelie bins that you have today, that was part of the plan all along, that at some point in time, if you wanted organics collection, that was the way it's going to go. We'll just give you a third bin. You put it out, you'd be a green bin you put all your organics. So from a collections perspective, we've been able to do this since 2008. Our biggest problem locally has been lack of processing capacity. The closest site until recently was in Guelph. So if we were collecting our material, we'd have to deliver it to Guelph, and it wasn't really feasible. Today, it's different. We have 3 facilities within our service area that we can deliver to, in addition to a number of on-farm digesters that have potential. Okay. So as far as offering a service, not a problem at all. We could start next year. No, about a 6 months notice, we got a program. The size that I'm telling you about is simply from a regulatory perspective about your obligation. So you're not required to do anything, but by all means, if you want one, then Don gives you a call, says I want a price, you give you a price, you guys decide what you want.
Yeah. Councillor Oak, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Francis, for the update. As of April 1st, the Blue Box program, the municipality won't be footing the cost for that. But I guess the question is what will that mean to our bill? Because obviously the truck still has to run the road to collect the garbage and not the recycling.
Yeah.
Somebody else is paying that.
No, we still will do the recycling.
Sorry?
We still do recycling. You
Yeah.
just won't pay us. Somebody else will pay us.
Exactly, but there's still a cost to
Yeah.
run the roads with the truck. So
Yeah.
just wondering what kind of savings that we can expect to see, not being responsible for the cost of that stop for the Blue Box.
So in rough numbers, okay, it costs you currently about $70 a household per year to have recycling service. On top of that, you pay another fee for waste collection, and in disposal, in your case, you have your own landfill, so we just deliver there. So as of April 1st, for all your residential customers, so whether it's single family or multifamily, that cost goes to zero. So you don't pay the $70 anymore, but you'll still pay for the 200 and some odd businesses that you have at $70 a year. So roughly your cost is going to go down about 94% from what you're paying now, or at least on the recycling side. Yeah.
Paula?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of council? Okay, and Francis, would you just kind of go over the leadership you've shown through the BRA with the renewable natural gas, the robotics and things like that that's happening at Blue Water Recycling? Could you just kind of talk about that for a moment, please?
Sure. As an association serving communities, I mean, we're a municipal cooperative, really. You know, we're the municipal waste department, if you want, for your municipality and 19 others. And so we always strive to, I mean, that the cooperative itself brings about certain economies of scale so that we can provide services that you have here that are comparable in much larger centers. Otherwise, they wouldn't be possible here. Things like the wheelie bin, the automated collections, and the single stream and things like this. But along with that, I mean, just like you, we have fiduciary responsibilities to maintain costs low and to, be good operators for the environment and stuff like that. So we're always looking for new initiatives to try to deliver the best program possible at the best possible cost to have the most impact for your residents. Some of those things, as Mayor Finch has outlined, is our fleet. We made the decision to move to compressed natural gas in 2014. So we actually have our own fueling station on site in Huron Park, which, by the way, this is where our operations are, if you didn't know. This is where we have our main terminal for the fleet, as well as our processing facility for all the recyclables that we collect in the 4-county area here. And so starting in 2014, we started converting our trucks from diesel to compressed natural gas. And normally by next year, we would have completed the transition, but because the last couple of years, the supply chain slowed down a little bit and it took us like 2 years to get a truck rather than 6 months. We're a little bit behind on that, but we'll be, for the most part, there next year as far as fully converted to compressed natural gas. It burns cleaner, a lot less emission, and a lot quieter trucks. Now, what we actually launched last year, we had our first truck going out burning RNG, which is renewable natural gas, and we have one truck doing that. It's you may have seen it around. It's got a cow on the side of the truck with its butt prominently there, because really we're using cow manure to generate our fuel. And so we started that last year. That's worked very well. And right now we've been working with a local supplier to be able to supply our entire fleet to go that way. But right now the cost, it depends on the credits that we can get on the fuel itself. So there's a possibility that starting in 2024, our entire fleet might be burning renewable natural gas, and if not, maybe half our fleet. But whenever that happens, and I can assure you that it will at least happen by 2030, as long as we have half our fleet burning renewable natural gas, we'll actually be a carbon neutral fleet 20 years ahead of the federal standard, which is 2050. Locally, we have, again, our material recovery facility where we process all the recyclables. It's probably one of the most advanced facilities in Ontario. We use a lot of technology to separate the recyclables that we have. We know we're limited in volume as far as how much we can bring in here, because we can only travel so far, but we pride ourselves in separating material into high quality quantities to sell to the market. And for that, there we have equipment, we call them optical sorters. They actually separate about 500,000 pieces an hour of material going through the belt, whereas an average human being could only do about 45 picks a minute. So it's a little bit faster. We actually have 6 robots on our line now because we've had difficulty finding people. It's been across, like even drivers, it's been difficult. And I know you've been affected locally here, where you may have seen collection a little later in the day on Friday, especially. And it's all it is. It's just short staff. We've never not gone out to do a route, but we thought coming out of COVID things would get better, but it actually got worse. So we're just working through that. We've certainly provided lots of increases for staff and bonuses and stuff like that to attract people, and we've got good people, but we could always use more.
And that story about the renewable natural gas, how far reaching was that article? Can you recall the number of people that actually saw?
We partnered with Enbridge on that one, and local company and the Ontario Waste Management Association, and it turned out to be the biggest launch in history for Enbridge, where we had over 1 billion hits worldwide on the launch of that truck. So it's pretty interesting
And that's done at Huron Park in South Huron.
in your park, in your own community.
Thank you. Any other questions for Francis? Mr. Oak, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Just not for Francis, but for our budget process that we're still working through. I guess have we built into the budget, the draft budget that we're working through right at the moment, the reduction in the blue box cost as of April 1st in our numbers?
Mr. Giverson, would you able to take that?
Yes, through you, Mayor Finch. We are very much aware of the changes in the cost. There's still a number of details that have to be worked out with BRA, including the potential for a new agreement. And they are still going through your budget process. So there were some projections of increase in some services for 2024. So we are completely aware of the situation, but it is a little too early. This sounds like a huge windfall, but there's a lot of other factors to consider because how our agreement with BRA is quite different on how we bill our customers. So there's some reconciliation that has to be done. So it's just, as I said, we are completely aware of the situation, but there's still work to be done, and it's still a little early to tell. I didn't hear the answer to the question that if is there the potential for our garbage collection costs to increase with the changes in the co-collection, and that's, I don't expect Francis to answer, but that's one of the details that we still want to discuss.
Yeah, and that was one of the things we've talked about before. We provide your service today using a co-collection system. So we collect both waste and recyclables in the same truck. I know we don't always collect at the same time. Sometimes we'll collect the waste, bring it to landfill, come back and collect the other, but pricing wise and service wise, especially in the rural area, we definitely do them both at the same time. And there's a cost to provide that service. And it's split a certain way right now on how we bill you. And so what was critical for us is if we lost that part. So if the association was not picked as the service provider for you, it did not mean it would have affected your waste side essentially, because it's not the case. If we're not collecting your recyclables anymore, that cost just disappears, because just like you said, we have to travel down every road still. And there's a very small difference between the two. So that's not the number, but I'm just going to throw a number. We talked about $70 for the recycling, and I know it's not the number, but say it's another $70 for waste. So you're paying $140 a year for service. Okay. If the association was not the service provider for recycling, it's not like your $70 for waste would have been the same. You would have paid about 85% of what you're paying combined, because we're still driving down the same road. So it's great news that we are the service provider and that we are for the next 9 years, because that agreement doesn't change for you. You're good to go that way. And we hope that remains that way. Now, if the producers in 2026 decide to change to bi-weekly, there may be some small impact at that point. It depends on how things go, but as it stands today, there's no impact. Budget wise for us on the recycling side, now I know it only affects you for the 1 quarter, but it's a 1.45% increase that we're putting through. And on the waste side, we're always tied to CPI, and CPI in September came in at 3.6%. So that's what you're going to see. So like I said, so the first quarter, essentially you're up 1.45 on recycling, you're up 3.6 on the waste, plus whatever bin numbers have changed. As of April 1st, the recycling side drops by about 94%, and the waste side continues. And then you still have your disposal costs. So that's why, like, I know you're probably all thinking, oh, well, our charge per bin now, what are we gonna do and that kind of stuff, but don't get too excited yet, because you do have other costs and probably other plans as well. So it's not a case where, money just disappeared, that's it.
Okay, thank you, Francis. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Vaughn, go ahead, please.
Yes, thanks, Francis, for your presentation. I'm not really too sure these days how many member municipalities you actually service with BRA.
20 municipalities.
20.
Yeah.
To 20. Okay.
Yeah, they're spread out in Huron, Perth, Lambton, and Middlesex. And on top of that, we service 3 First Nation communities.
Okay.
And then we don't collect, but we do all the processing for the city of Stratford.
All of the processing for Stratford.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And any other questions or comments? Francis, you got the last word, Francis. Is there anything you would ask the public that they could do to make the job of the recycling better as far as what they're putting in their blue box?
Stop wish cycling. So we have very clear lists. The program is for printed paper and packaging. It's not meant for bowling balls or lawn chairs or pool covers or your dead chicken or whatever. We don't want those. We get them all the time in the recycling facility. It doesn't help us at all. We can't sell them. It actually contaminates other products. We really only want packaging and printed paper. And that we can process all day long. We have markets for everything, and we pride ourselves of having local markets as well. Like we're not shipping anything overseas. Everything stays right here in Ontario where we can. And a couple of materials like aluminum, our markets are really actually in the US, so we have to go there. But otherwise, nothing else leaves the continent. And but we want you to give us recyclables, not your garbage. And that would, so no Christmas lights, no garden hose this time of the year. You're putting away your garden hose, put it in the garbage or put it in the garage, but not in the blue bin.
I think why that's important is because there's a cost when those things go through and they damage the belt and other things.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I was mentioned earlier, we have 4 optical machines that separate materials, and they have a belt that runs at 600 feet a minute, so it's very quick. And even a small piece of pipe that may be the cutoff pipe from a fence that you put up or whatever, if it lands on that belt the wrong way, it shreds it. And that belt has no lacing, so it's glued together, and it's 9 feet wide, and it costs us $40,000 to replace it. So if you thought you were smart about recycling a little piece of pipe, you should have gone to the local scrapyard, because now it just costs us $40,000. So that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. Whether the bowling balls, they fall into some of our equipment, they start bouncing around, they could hit our staff and hurt them seriously. We don't want that either. Any organic material in there is sometimes we'll make it through the conveyor systems and end up with our paper. And what tends to happen is if they sit around too long, it actually heats up, like it starts composting and can start a fire. If we have a fire in our facility, the plant's gone. Right now you have no home for recycling at all. Same thing with critical in facilities across North America, batteries. Most deadly enemy right now, lithium batteries, regular batteries, don't put them in there. I know they look like plastic or metal or whatever, but they cause fire and they burn down facilities. Insurance is tough enough to get as it is now, and if we lose one, we're in trouble.
Great, thank you very much. Is there any other comments or questions for Francis at this time? No, great, thank you very much, Francis.
Thank you.
For all the work you do there and all your leadership there. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Have a great night.
Thank you. Ms. Masula Carlson, 4.2, please.
The South Huron Committee of the Whole receives a delegation of Blue Water Recycling Association update overview as presented by Francis Veilleux.
Mover, please. Moved by Councillor Oak, seconded by Councillor Neeb. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? And that carries with 6. Thank you. 4.3, please. Mr. Giverson. Ms. Masula Carlson, any comments at this point? Don, whenever you're ready.
Off to a bad start. Good evening, Mayor Finch. So my presentation tonight, go to slide 2, is to address, provide additional information, but to address any concerns or questions. So as outlined previously in the work plan, I wanted to present additional information on the need for the project, any potential future developments, any questions about capacity, cost sharing options, and what our financial plan is. Next slide, please. So the next slide is just a general overview of what the Grand Bend sewer system looks like. It's to capture the kind of the overall system. So it's a little difficult to see, but basically, South Huron has a serviced area at the south end of the municipality on the Lambton Shores border. You can see an extensive private sewer system in Grand Cove Estates. There are municipal sewers on Highway 21 in that area. And there's a number of private pumping stations. And currently, we're using the Lambton Shores sewer on Highway 21 to send our sewage to the main pumping station in Grand Bend, which is PS2. We have recently completed a joint trunk sewer from the main pumping station in Grand Bend across the municipal drain, up Municipal Drive behind the Legion, and up to Ontario Street, and it's north of Indian Road. So all the sewage from the Highway 21 corridor is now going through that new sewer. Grand Cove Estates, their sewage goes, I say, out the back. It's roughly at the 2/3 point at the east end of their site, goes through Lambton Shores, down to a Lambton Shores sewer along County Road 81 or Main Street East to PS2. PS2 is jointly owned between us and Lambton Shores by agreement. There's a forced main between PS2 and the new sewage plant, which is also jointly owned with Lambton Shores. And then we have the new sewage treatment plant, which is very rough numbers, is a 2/3 Lambton Shores, 1/3 South Huron. So that's basically the Grand Bend system, other than we do have a small pump station in front of the former POG building with a force main that runs across country to the new sewage plant. There's a private pump station at Dark Horse Winery and the Playhouse with a force main that runs down Beeline, Grand Bend line, Mullard line to the sewage plant. Next slide, please. So the next two slides show the proposed trunk sewer extension. So the trunk sewer is currently constructed to a terminal manhole just north of Indian Road. So this proposed extension is to extend that trunk sewer from just north of Indian Road, crosses the Walker Drain in an existing sewer easement until you get to the south end of the former Oakwood Golf Course lands on the east side of the highway. And then there's a highway crossing. So those former golf course lands are now owned by Tridon. And the sewer then turns and heads north in an easement that Tridon is obligated to through their subdivision agreement to provide us the easement. So it's along the edge of the highway and continues, crosses the Walker Drain again, and then terminates at the street that goes into the new subdivision. Roughly, well, it is opposite the entrance to the Oakwood Links condos. So that's the route and what's planned and or proposed for the trunk sewer. Next slide, please. So the need for the sewer, we have two phases of the Tridon subdivision or the Soul Haven subdivision. So what I call phase one, which is the Soul Haven subdivision on the former Oakwood driving range, is approved. So the plan of subdivision is approved to proceed. It cannot be serviced in its entirety from the pumping station that exists on the west side of the highway in that same vicinity. There is not capacity for that entire development, does not exist. There is remaining capacity, but it's not enough for that entire subdivision to develop. So they require a sewer extension to that subdivision in order for Solhaven Phase 1 to proceed. The Phase 2 area is south of the Walker Drain on the former golf course lands. And the developer has advised that as soon as the first phase is proceeding, he is immediately going to start the approvals for the second phase. And this trunk sewer basically has to go by the front door of the Phase 2 area to get to the Phase 1 area. So what the developer requires out of this is to have servicing available for both phases of that subdivision, north of the Walker Drain and south of the Walker Drain. Now, to be clear, the proposed subdivision south of the Walker Drain has no approvals. So there's no draft plan approval. We have nothing here on it. But the developer is indicating he wishes to pay for the capacity to be able to service that land. The developer also owns the former Oakwood Tennis Court lands. He has chosen not to include his share or not to include those lands in his share of the cost. So that is part of the future development that he is currently working on a proposal. And there's been numerous proposals over the years to build everything from a high-rise seniors apartments to a long-term care facility. I've seen everything or many different iterations of that. But there is an active development proposal for that parcel of land. So the other potential or the other demonstrated needs for the sewer is the municipality did approve Southwest Marine to develop on a holding tank. And they do have a requirement to connect to a sewer when a sewer is built past their property. So those are the main ones. Next slide, please. Over the years, we have had numerous development inquiries, and these inquiries come from everybody from owners of the property to their agents, engineers, planners, potential developers. So it's a mixed bag of many different people. Some are like direct property owners, but many are not direct property owners. There's somebody acting on their behalf. And I've been in the development industry for over 40 years. And that's very common. So from top to bottom, we've had those kind of inquiries from the Big Bill storage at the former MTO yard, down to the south end to the vacant land beside St. John by the Lake Anglican Church. They've multiple properties. We've had development inquiries, some very active, some tire kickers. But we've had that whole strip has had many different inquiries. Oakwood Inn have a private pumping station which has recently failed. It is aging. They are looking for a solution, and so that they can abandon that private pumping station. So their inquiries led to they hired an engineer, designed a sewer extension so they could abandon the pumping station and extend sewers to the south, go down towards Indian Road, and then head east to the manhole that's at the top end of our current system. They obtained pricing, and in the end they decided not to proceed with that. So I've had conversations with Oakwood Inn and Resort that the possibility of connecting from their private pumping station directly to the east and connect onto a future trunk, which I told them that is possible to do that. They believe it's less expensive. I have explained that when the trunk sewer is extended, there will be a growth component and proposing a cost recovery bylaw, and there would be a charge to connect in addition to the physical construction costs. And so they're aware of these facts, and they've chosen to just wait at this stage. And the last point, which is all many times forgotten, is the Oakwood area pumping station that services the condos and was designed for some surrounding development, was approved by the ministry and approved with our partner Lambton Shores as a temporary pumping station. It's in various documents from early master plans for the region as a temporary facility that when the ultimate servicing was built in the area, it would be abandoned. In our joint agreement that we have with Lambton Shores, there is a clause to that effect. So we can continue to operate it, but the day is coming where there will be a requirement to remove it. The trigger will be if our permanent trunk sewer is extended, the pump station will go. So I want to make that very clear that that's the environmental assessment for that pump station. That is the agreements with Lambton Shores when it was constructed, and that's based on the ministry approval. It was temporary. It was never intended to be a permanent station. Next slide, please. So the next slide is to show council what the Solhaven subdivision looks like and how in the proposed servicing. So the Street A aligns with the entrance to Oakwood Links condos. The swim pond is on the south side of Street A, kind of set back from the highway, but it occupies that corner. So it gives you an idea of they're proposing in a single family lots. There's a multi or a higher density block as you come in off the highway. Next slide, please. So this was a specific request. So this lists all the potential future development lands, either by address or by legal description, but they basically capture the land beside the St. John by the Lake Anglican Church, the Oakwood tennis court lands, and all the land from north of Tridon up to Gore Road, and then includes the former MTO yard. And then there's a small subdivision just immediately east of the former MTO yard. Next slide, please. So this is a map which shows and this is potential, and I stress the potential future development lands. And at the top end, there's two blocks. The former MTO yard is the triangular section. So that's also included. So next slide, please. So capacity. Now I left out all the history since 1950 for the sewers in Grand Bend, but it has a long history and I've lived a lot of it. So the recent history, anything we're doing now does date back almost 20 years. So all the current initiatives, there are many initiatives previously. Some went forward from the late 50s, early 60s that culminated in the building of the first sewer system in Grand Bend, 1979, the Sewage Lagoon, PS2, and servicing in the old part of the village, all in the village of Grand Bend, that's all Lambton Shores. But even at that time, there were land and properties in Stephen Township, which is now South Huron, that were included in that sewer system from 1979. The most notable is Grand Cove Estates. But there was also other properties, the Green Forest subdivision, which is now Lambton Shores at the end of Gill Road. So there's lots of history of what's gone on with sewers in Grand Bend. But the current stuff, so in 2004 was the original, I call it the Dillon Master Plan, which was Lambton Shores, South Huron, and Blue Water. And it had a plan that went all the way from the Asalba River cut at the south end in Lambton Shores, included all the village of Grand Bend, South Huron, Blue Water up to St. Joseph's, and it went all the way to Dashwood. It was a massive overall plan for the entire area. So that's where the original capacity started, was with that document. And along the way, and I'm just going to skip through those, there were a number of EAs that were done for the sewage plant, EAs that were done for the collection system. This very system that we're talking about tonight has an environmental assessment proving the need for that trunk sewer that was from 2012. So next slide, please. So more recently, everybody's aware of what happened with the sewage plant and the joint agreements. But more recently, there was an agreement, a memorandum of understanding with Lambton Shores to construct the joint trunk sewer from PS2 across the Walker Drain, up Municipal Drive, behind the Legion, up to Ontario Street to terminate at north of Indian Road. And the joint part of this is up to the municipal boundary. And then once it crosses the municipal boundary by the boat store, that is 100% South Huron sewer. And council, you are aware that before this proceeded, there was a discussion with the municipality of Blue Water, whether they wanted to exercise their right under the agreement to participate in the sewer so they could extend the sewer further up Highway 21. They declined. So that is why we consulted with Blue Water, because we had a legal obligation under agreement to not to consult, but to request if they would choose to participate or not, and they chose to decline. Next slide, please. So this map is attached to the MOU. It shows the capacities that were part of that agreement. So that agreement was from 2020. So what I'm trying to demonstrate to council is capacities and allocations have been around since 2004 through various sewer planning documents, from master plans, environmental assessments, to building the sewage plant, to negotiating this most recent agreement for a sewer that we just finished construction late in 2022. Next slide, please. So this, in the next two slides, these slides demonstrate the due diligence that was carried out by staff with the resources from our municipal engineer to evaluate different options. So our top option, option one, is cost sharing based on incremental pipe size increase, or a lot of people refer to it as oversizing costs, where the developer is obligated to pay for the cost of a local sewer to be built from where our sewer currently terminates up to Street A in the subdivision. Now, it's a very interesting challenge with the trunk sewer and a local sewer. There are numerous crossings of the Walker Drain, which makes the sewer deep and flat. And if you're an engineer, you'll know that to get the capacity for that pipe, you have to make the pipe size larger, because the flatter grades, there's a engineering equation calculation on determining capacity. So how deep it has to be and going under the Walker drains dictates the size. So the local sewer was determined to be 250 millimeter. And then once it reached about the halfway point, it can be a 200 millimeter, but it's a very deep sewer. So this basic principle of incremental pipe size increase is the developers paying the lion's share of the cost to build whatever it costs to build a local sewer to follow that route. The municipal share is to oversize that pipe to make the pipe larger. It's not any deeper, but it's larger. There's impact on the trench and dealing with excess soil regulations because it's a bigger pipe, there's bigger trench, and there's more costs associated with that. So the oversizing cost, how this option is calculated is on the basis of a local sewer, very deep, crossing the Walker drain coming up to Street A. That's the developer's obligation. And that was costed out completely. And then there was a separate costing on to make that pipe larger. So we can add other properties both downstream of Tridon, like the Southwest Marine property, and upstream lands like the tennis court, the Oakwood tennis court lands, and any other development up to County Road 83. So this is how the sharing of costs were determined at the 75-25. This has been simplified, but there was a considerable amount of work put into this, considerable amount of engineering services. So this was professionally designed. There are preliminary engineering drawings, costed, and this is how the cost sharing was determined. And once everything was compared, it rolled up to this is what the cost sharing ended up being, 75-25. But you see the draft agreement in the with the report tonight, and the draft agreement has a pay schedule attached, and the cost sharing will be based on the actual cost to construct and quantities, and it's all itemized. It's as detailed and as fair as you want to be. But the basic principle of this is the developer is responsible for the cost of the local sewer. The municipality is just picking up, making that pipe bigger, and any associated costs with that. This is how it's calculated. Next slide, please. So option 2, and the reason why we put this out, because this was one of the first conversations with the developer's engineer. They wanted to do cost sharing based on a flow proportional. I've been around a long time. I've seen all these different types of cost sharing, and this is very common to offer to cost share on this basis. But the actual flow from the Tridon subdivision is only about 25% of the flow for that entire area. So this is the worst deal for the municipality if we went this route. The developer needs a sewer. He's obligated to build a sewer up to that subdivision. So if we did it on a flow proportional basis, we would be paying the 1.8 mil, and he'd be paying 600,000. That project would not be viable for the municipality, and that is not an equitable arrangement. The developer is developing the site, not the municipality. This is the best cost sharing arrangement that you can come up with, which is fair and equitable to both parties. Next slide, please. So this next slide shows the capacity allocations that is attached to the draft agreement. And this is the same allocations that have been evolving since 2004. So the existing properties along the lakeshore, you can look at the Dillon plan as I did just before this meeting from 2004. Those are the same numbers. The allocations for the subdivision, the Tridon subdivision, are what the developer requires for the subdivision, which we have checked, our municipal engineer has checked. The future growth area has also been professionally checked. Next slide, please. The financial plan. So GM Blue Plan Engineering is our consultant on this project. They've already completed a preliminary design, and they have done the costing. So that is the current estimate. The $2,443,000 plus HST. Based on the option 1, which staff are recommending, the developer share would be $1,837,000, and the municipal share would be $606,000, both plus HST. So we are proposing, staff are proposing, to use the existing reserves to fund our $606,000. And to recover those costs, we would propose a cost recovery bylaw to recover from any person in the future, existing or future growth that connected to this sewer, similar to other cost recovery bylaws. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions from council.
Thank you, Don. Very thorough. Thank you very much. Any questions from members of council? Councillor Vaughn, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I have a number of questions. And so just so I'm not monopolizing the meeting, if I'm going on and people want to raise their hand, I'll be happy to take a moment to take a break, and if that's all right with
I'm
you,
sure
Mayor.
we've done that in the past. I don't think anybody in council would be offended. Please feel free to go ahead.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, Don, the first part I wanted to ask you questions about was around the needs. So if we could go back to those slides, and thank you for your presentation. It's quite a lengthy presentation with a lot of detail. So when I look at the need for the trunk sewer, Solhaven subdivision phase 1 is approved, and definitely I can see where they need a way to get their sewage for that subdivision to the Grand Bend sewage treatment facility. Phase 2, similarly, once that's all approved. The future development lands north of the Solhaven subdivision, and maybe even some of the other places on the map that are in pink color are the potential future users. And so my question about that is, I know that there's been, from what you've told us so far, a lot of inquiries from all of those, well, maybe not all, but most of those properties, or a good number of them. And so what I'd like to know is, have any of those properties actually given a financial commitment to pay for any of this oversizing?
Mr. Giberson?
Through you, Mayor Finch. No, we have no commitments from any of those landowners.
Okay. And so similarly with those lands that are highlighted in pink, has there been any modeling or any sort of indication from those potential future properties about what they might want to build in terms of, we know Tridon has a number of households that they're looking at. What about from these other properties? Is there any indication of what it is they might be looking for?
Through you, Mayor Finch, yes, we have several properties that they have submitted either concept plans or made requests for specific capacity allocations.
Okay, so they have made requests for specific capacity calculations, and our engineer who did the sizing of the pipe has included that in the potential size of pipe.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Finch. That is correct. Any parcels of land that we had a concept plan, proposal, or a request, those were included. Other lands, not to anticipate your next question, but the other potential development lands, the capacity is calculated based on surrounding densities and estimated to the best of the engineer's ability.
Councillor Vaughn, I believe Councillor Oak has a question.
Certainly.
Councillor Oak.
Thank you, Mayor. And just in that vein, the reason I bring it up is so the future development, in light of some of the changes that have gone on with the government as of lately, with intensive developments, has the calculation for the sizing of the pipe been based on, you said, existing properties in the area? Has there been any calculations of if there was a whole bunch of townhouses go in, or if there was a whole bunch of, some apartment buildings and townhouses and single family, like, I guess, what kind of analysis for those future development properties as far as usage for the extension?
Yes, through you, Mayor Finch. Yes, intensification is part of the consideration. And I don't know if the Tridon folks are here tonight, but they've already provided a concept plan for their provided me with a concept plan for their phase 2, which has intensification more in line with the provincial government initiatives to provide more housing, but more intensification. So it's not same old, the whole area with single family homes. The capacity that's been allocated for future growth has considered all of those things. There's a number of other factors with the potential development land. There's a very significant floodplain, and as you go north, which is similar to the what we're dealing with at the Tridon land. So all of those things are considered. It's not just a block. There's more sophisticated engineering involved than just saying that's a block and there you can put so many people in that block of land. There are many other considerations, including intensification that is permitted under Bill 23.
Follow up, Mr. Oak.
Yeah, thanks. And just give Marissa a little bit more rest here. The Blue Water wasn't part of the original pipe that went in the trunk sewer, or they decided not to take part in that. Is there any talk about them potentially being part of this extension and as future development? I don't know, if there's been any talks or them being involved in coming back into the trunk sewer if they were to be part of this extension. I just wondering if that has been in any of the capacity calculations or any talks with them.
Through you, Mayor Finch. I have had very recent discussions with, this is at the staff level, not at the political level, but at the staff level with my counterpart in Blue Water, and there's no interest. And the way the sewers work is like painting a floor. We've started on the downstream end, so there's no room in that pipe unless somebody wants to give up something. But we built a pipe from PS2 heading upstream across the drain municipal drive up to Ontario Street. So that was a very consequential moment for Blue Water. they had to decide if you're in, you had to get in and when you were sizing a pipe at the bottom end, as it moves upstream, it's getting smaller. So we're building the upstream portion or proposing to build the upstream portion. So there's no opportunity for Blue Water to get back in now. So they have that right under the joint agreement. They chose not to exercise that route. They completely understand if they want to access the sewage plant in the future. This is at the staff level. They understand they will have to build their own system totally separate from ours, which could be like a force main from, you know, the Highlands subdivision area down 83. You go down Beeline and try to make your way to the plant. But those are the kind of options they're looking at. Any discussions with Blue Water, that's not possible for them to get into the trunk.
Thank you. Councillor Vaughn, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. All right, so where was I? You mentioned, it's not on the bullets here, but I think during your presentation, Don, you mentioned that, something about the tennis court lands, that they were, tennis court lands were maybe not, part of the, I'm gonna call it a 75% Tridon pipe for lack of another way to reference it right now. What did you mean by that? Or do I have that right, that it's not included?
Through you, Mayor Finch. No, you were correct. That is not part of the Tridon 75% of the trunk cost. It's part of the municipal share as a future development cost.
And so just supposing for a moment we don't go forward with a future share of municipal costs, the 25%, how will Tridon deal with the tennis court lands?
Through you, Mayor Finch, they would face the same situation as their current subdivision. They would have to extend a local sewer up to that property. Otherwise, you can't service that property.
A local sewer up to that property, like, but not use that extended pipe. Some other means, what you're thinking?
So if they chose to develop the tennis court lands, Tridon would be required to install their own separate small local sewer to connect onto our sewer, follow the same route heading north and continue north to the north end of the Tridon subdivision, at which they then could cross the highway. So it'd be separate, local, small, and would not have us included. And they would have, that local sewer would have to be designed to include the tennis court lands.
Follow up, Councillor Vaughn?
Oh, yeah, I haven't.
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So, Southwest Marine was approved to be developed on a sewage holding tank. And, there's a requirement, I cannot remember when this was approved, how that actually worked. But a requirement for them at some future point in time to connect to a sewer pipe, most likely when one was available, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So what was the actual deal there? Because surely we weren't approving Southwest Marine on the basis of Tridon or a future trunk pipe. I don't quite get it.
Through you, Mayor Finch, no, this is very common. So when there is even the potential to have municipal services available, that developments are approved on the basis of a holding tank. I can tell you several properties in Centralia that building permits were issued on holding tanks to save that property owner the expense of putting in an expensive on-site private sewage or septic system. And this was before the Credit in Centralia sewers were approved. is not an uncommon thing. We've done it here in our own municipality on other projects. Because there's another project on the horizon or planned to occur. There's no sure thing. If it didn't occur, and if this doesn't proceed, then there will be a requirement to install a on-site private septic system. But this is not an unusual thing. I would also let council know, this is a chief building official call, not the general manager of infrastructure. The chief building official, under his authority, under the Building Code Act of Ontario, he would make this call, whether he would permit or he would issue a building permit for a property on a holding tank. It has provisions and safeguards, but it's the CBO call.
Councillor Vaughn, go ahead.
Mhm. Okay. So, want to talk about temporary infrastructure and the reference that you had to the Grand Bend Sewage Joint Tri-Party Agreement. I believe it's section 40 that of that agreement that talks about allowing South Huron essentially to have temporary infrastructure usage of that trunk line. And my understanding is when we approved the recently constructed trunk line from PS2 to Indian Road, that yes, there's a portion of it on the boat property that is 100% owned by South Huron, but the rest of the pipe is 50-50 ownership. Is that correct? That piece that far?
Through you, Mayor Finch. Yes, I'm familiar with the clause in the agreement that we have right of continued use to send sewage into a sewer system that's 100% owned by Lambton Shores. Now we're sending sewage through a pipe that we only partially own. Lambton Shores still owns a percentage of that new trunk sewer. It's not 50-50, but I can't cite it off the top of my head. So that joint agreement is, now that that's trunk sewer has been constructed, the municipal solicitors are currently working on updating that agreement to bring all these clauses in. So at this point, that clause still applies, but it doesn't. So you are correct. There's a clause that allows South Huron to have continued use of the Lambton Shores infrastructure. And we now know that there is a new joint sewer constructed, which that pumping station is discharging in. So that is those facts are correct. It doesn't change the fact that we have a ministry approval and an environmental assessment that supports the approval of that pumping station, which all listed as it's a temporary facility until such time as there's a permanent infrastructure extended up to the to that property.
Okay, so I have to admit that's new news to me. I had really thought when we went ahead with the new trunk sewer to go to PS2 that this temporary infrastructure phraseology would no longer apply. I don't see why it would apply. I understood it applying when Lambton Shores owned 100% of that pipe, but that's not the case anymore. I didn't think we needed to go to Lambton Shores to get approval for every sewage work that we had going forward. I don't know anything about this ministry approval piece at all in terms of, I guess what I'm kind of taken aback with here is there's a debenture outstanding right now. It's a little over $550,000 that Oakwood pays for the infrastructure that services Oakwood Links, potential tennis court lands, little iffy on who actually has those rights. And so going forward, the question is what happens with that debenture? And what happens with that temporary works? That debenture doesn't come due until 2047. So it's a 40-year debenture. I'm assuming the debenture was given that kind of time period to match the life expectancy of the sewage infrastructure that was put in place at the time. So I'm just a bit taken aback in terms of there being any kind of ministry tie to this being temporary works. And I'm a bit amazed that Oakwood would pay $600,000 plus for that kind of a situation.
Mr. Guyers?
Yes, through you, Mayor Finch. So I'm well aware of the debenture, and that dates from 2006. Oakwood Inn are very much aware of the debenture. The term of the debenture is not tied to the life expectancy of that pumping station. It had not relative to it at all. I can tell you the debenture and the negotiations with Oakwood Inn and Resort were carried out by former CAO. I'm privy to the information. But my understanding of the term of the debenture was to make the annual payments as small as possible. Not to reduce the overall cost, because with the interest in a long term, you're going to pay a lot more interest, and in the end, it's going to be more expensive. But there's no linkage to the life expectancy of that pump station. In our own asset management plan, electrical, mechanical, instrumentation, so pumps, controls, things like that, the life expectancy in our own asset management plan is 15 years. Like the 40-year debenture is not linked to the life of that asset. There is a legal requirement with these debentures. You cannot debenture for any longer than the life of an asset. So if an asset is only totally going to exist for 20 years, you can't debenture for 40 years. So that's maybe where that information is coming from. That's searchable from the provincial government as well. So you can't debenture something for longer than what an asset is to last. So things wear out in a pump station, but the whole thing will last far beyond 40 years. So there's no link, no connection. Unfortunately, our CAO who negotiated that agreement with Oakwood, he is no longer here with us. And the person on the other side of the negotiations at Oakwood Inn is also no longer with us. But I was privy to the conversations, and that was the arrangement. The Oakwood Links condominiums could not develop without sewers. And that's why that pumping station was built. It's also sized to allow the tennis court lands to develop. And there's an environmental assessment that includes these parcels. So there's 3 parcels of land that are designed to go into that pump station. Now, there's no provision of how you actually physically get from the pump station to the tennis court lands, because you physically can't get there. But there's an ESR for the pump station that lists these properties that would allow development to occur before the ultimate servicing was built in the area. And nobody in 2000 and started in 2004 knew the timing of when any of this stuff was going to happen, whether the sewage plant would be built, not built, delayed, trunk sewers built, and all that timing was completely unknown. And my crystal ball doesn't work too well, but you're trying to gaze out 15 to 20 years, it gets rather challenging. So Oakwood Inn and Resort chose to sell the Oakwood Links condo land to a London developer, and it had to develop on municipal sewers. So hence the temporary sewage pumping station. and that debenture is registered against the Oakwood Inn property. So it's fully secure. This is already. I better stop there. So it's fully secured and it's been checked. And the choices that were made by the participants at the time. I'm also aware that the participants today don't agree with the deal that the dad made more than 15 years ago now. But here we are. That was the arrangement. In order for the Oakwood Links condominiums to develop, they were required to develop on municipal sewers. This was the solution that was put in place because the timing of the ultimate sewer works to build a trunk up to that point or whatever it was going to look like was unknown. So they chose to proceed that way. They chose to debenture the maximum amount and they chose the 40 years.
Thank you, Mr. Giverson. Councillor Vaughn.
Yeah, so a bit of a follow-up to that whole piece. Back to the temporary, what's it, the environment. Somebody else has had a say in the past, a ministry, about this being temporary, and I don't understand why it's temporary from the ministry's perspective.
To you, Mayor Finch, the ministry's position, and when this work was done in 2005, 2006, was South Huron did not have a legal outlet. And anybody who farms understands about if you have a legal outlet, you don't have a legal outlet. So there was property in South Huron that did not have a legal sanitary outlet. And there was negotiations with Lambton Shores for a temporary connection to a sewer on Ontario Street, which was 100% owned by Lambton Shores. So this is why it was approved as a temporary connection. And there's an EA to back it up.
Right, but now, okay, if the ministry did that on the basis of Lambton Shores owned 100% of that pipe, that's no longer the case. Why would the ministry care today?
So through you, Mayor Finch. So today they would care on the basis that if we added any additional flows, changed anything to do with the environmental assessment, there would be a requirement to redo the ESR. Basically, we'd have to go through the approval process and substantiate the need for the pumping station through the EA process. And at this point, the pumping station is temporary. There's no future in that pump station. It just exists until at some point in time, a sewer is built up to that point. So you would have to go through the approval process again if you want to change its status from a temporary facility to a permanent facility. And there's no value to the municipality to do that.
Well, except potentially to not have to spend $600,000 to reroute that sewage.
So through you, Mayor Finch, I'd like to answer that question. That pumping station has limited capacity and cannot facilitate any of this development that we're talking about. It could handle a small phase of the Solhaven subdivision, but that's the limitation. And something I didn't really want to get into an open council, but there's threat of litigation on that pump station, which also has an impact here. And I will not discuss that in open council.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Councillor Vaughn, go ahead, please.
Yeah, there probably are a number of things about open council and talking about this, but this is the meeting that we have. Okay, so back to thinking about the Tridon phase 1 approval process. It was discussed many times around this table that initially Tridon might want to bring or to go over to the pumping station, the Oakwood Link pumping station for phase 1. And I know it was brought to this table that the question of, is there enough capacity in the pumping station? And there were responses received to council at the time that talked about, yes, there would be, but there probably would be a requirement to upgrade the pumps in the pumping station or upgrade the pumping station in some way. But there was enough capacity to fully service through the Oakwood station for PS1. I further recall that this was brought back to Tridon, and subsequently Tridon came to us with a letter and basically said that that won't work for phase 2. That would be a throwaway. So maybe we should be looking at this in a different from a different perspective. So again, somewhat taken aback that we are now being advised that there never was capacity in the pumping station.
Mr. Giberson?
If we want to discuss the underlying reason for the lack of capacity in the Oakwood pumping station, I request we go into closed session.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vaughn, anything further?
I actually have another request. And, you know,
Sure.
what Don has asked for is quite valid. And so what I would say is, I'm only right now at the needs. I have a whole laundry list of questions yet to go. Quite a number of them to do with cost. And I have to say that this is a less than ideal way to go about understanding what's being proposed here. I think we're way premature to be even talking about signing any kind of an agreement on a 25-75 basis. I think we should either give an opportunity to the CAO and to Don to come back with a more fulsome report, or we should look at creating a task force that perhaps has a couple of council people and some staff people together to actually dig down and find out the answers to this question, these questions, without it being done in council. So I agree with Mr. Giberson that this is not an ideal way to go about this. And I'm proposing we take another look at how we might.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Giberson or members of staff at this time? Okay. Mr. Oak, do you have something?
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I believe there's a lot of other information that we need here as well, because there's the costing, the cost, or the idea of the $600,000 in the proposed coming out of the sewer reserves. And at this point in time, the sewer reserves are in a negative position, or what I understand, because they've borrowed from the water reserves. So I'm just trying to figure out, so there's a lot of information still yet to come here. So not sure what the next steps should be.
Councillor Need, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor Finch. For the cost recovery bylaw, that's something that's, from what I understand, fairly common. And I'm just wondering if staff could kind of outline some of the other cost recovery bylaws that we have throughout the municipality, and similarly, what costs were initially put up front for that, for those cost recovery bylaws.
Mr. Giberson?
Yes, through you, Mayor Finch. We've had several cost recovery bylaws. The very typical growth related share is in the 20 to 25%. Examples of that, the London Road South water and sewer servicing. There's a portion of growth related, and there's a cost recovery bylaw. That's from 2006. We've recovered, we're getting close to about half of the growth related components been recovered. Even though we have a really difficult servicing situation down there now. The Credit in Centralia cost recovery bylaw also has a growth component, 20% was deferred. The Grand Bend Sewage Treatment Plant has a similar component. So we've used that tool for several capital projects that have a growth component. The other tool that can be used is to put these costs in your DC charges bylaw. This has been discussed with several previous councils, and I believe this one as well, with the most recent DC charges bylaw on the choice between, do you put the growth related costs in the DC charges bylaw and then recover it through the DC charge whenever a new building permit's issued? Or do you have it area specific and recover from growth development or any new connections in that specific area? The London Road South bylaw occurred just after amalgamation. First bylaw was 2004. So this municipality has pretty consistently elected to do cost recovery for growth to specific areas. Deferred part of the cost. So the principal and interest payments were carried by the ratepayers until it was repaid with interest. And then it allowed development to occur and was proper planning for those areas. The tool has been used many times. As it turned out, we were extremely wise for doing that. You, the elected officials, were extremely wise to use that tool with the new legislation from the province of Ontario, which restricts use and access to DC charges, and in some cases outright eliminated. So if we use those tools, we would have nothing. So this is a common approach that has been used since the inception of the municipality.
Thank you. Deputy, you have a comment?
Yeah, there is a lot of information here. I have to agree, but this isn't the first time we saw this. We've had discussions over this for quite some time. We had a developer here looking to build homes to move our tax base ahead and to bring future development to Grand Bend, which to me may help with other assets back there. And I don't want to put any words in anybody's mouth, but community centers, that type of stuff. And also like I look at this cost, the total cost is $2.4 million. The developer share is 1.8. Like we're going to walk away from that and they're going to put their pipe in. It's going to cost us $600,000. How can we spend money any better and to have a capacity for future development in the municipality of South Huron without doing this? Mr. Guyverson already said about Credit in Centralia. If we had to look forward into Credit in Centralia, there would be no building going on there at all, because there was people almost getting pushed out of their homes because no sewers. The water was put in there because of the sewer system, septic tanks. So to me, I'm in favor of moving this forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Neebe, you had a comment?
Thank you, Mayor Finch. And yeah, the work plan and the work that's been undertaken by staff has been ongoing since 2021, when we approved moving forward with the work plan and investigating this process. I look at this as an investment in the long-term sustainability of the municipality. We have a demonstrated need. We have a developer that is willing to front end the costs for what they're intending to put in for those developments. So I'm also in favor of moving ahead.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Vaughn, go ahead, please.
I am not in favor of moving ahead. We as a council have agreed that development pays for development. I'm looking at the needs that have been expressed here in this presentation, and I am not seeing a lot of future development here. Moreover, I'm wondering what happened to our official plan, our vision for this entire Port Blake area. We still have not created one. When we approved the Tridon Phase 1, we agreed to go forward with a secondary plan for all of the lands, including all of the lands in pink that were included in the Port Blake area. We have a plan for an official plan in 2024, but we've not undertaken that work. We are allowing a developer and a pipeline to define our future in the area of Port Blake. As it relates to the 20% or 25% that would be paid by future developing properties, yes, I know that's a model that many councils over the past couple of decades have approved. But I also know that we haven't had a lot of development in the areas over which those bylaws were enacted. So, as Mr. Giberson said, in the meantime, till a future developer comes along, it's the users of the sewer system in South Huron that pay for those costs of debt. That's forced up our bills for those users over the years. And I don't really know how any future development monies have been applied and lessened that burden. So like I said, to me, there's a lot more questions than I'm getting answers from, and no disrespect to Don whatsoever. But this is a pretty painful way to go about this. And I think as a council, we deserve to know more. I don't think we can just take this lightly. This is another $600,000. We don't have this, except for this year's budget. This was not in our 10-year plan. We have a lot of 10-year plans. We have almost $13 million of capital in our 10-year plan that is attributable to capital cost improvements of our sewage network. And most of it is to come from a reserve we don't have. I'm just saying, I think it's enough to just take a laundry list of properties and say these are our future users when we don't really know that. I don't feel that we have a case here to support a $600,000 spend. So I'm not against that without considerable more work.
Thank you, Councilor Vaughn. Mr. Giberson, comment, response?
Yes, through you, Mayor Finch. I left the banker boxes full of studies and reports from the Grand Bend sewers in my office for a reason. This has been studied to death. I've personally been involved in several environmental assessments, from everything from the sewage plant to the trunk sewers to all sorts of things. None of this is new, and it's all been in the public domain. But in answer to the question about how have we benefited, Jessica's house, the Toyota dealership, 2 phases of the South Point subdivision. None of that development could occur. None, zero. If the council of the day back in 2004 had been wise enough to make that decision. And when they did, to do that cost recovery part of the, first build the growth component into that system. Build it, do a cost recovery bylaw, follow the same model. If they hadn't had the wisdom to do that, you'd have nothing happening down there, including improvements at HMP, which I always overlook. But that improvement was both sewers and water, which brought fire protection to that part of the urban area of Exeter. Now we have Crediton, which, since I lived through it from cradle to grave, and sometimes I felt I was in my grave. In Crediton, Australia, it was everybody's going to die if we put these sewers in there. In Crediton, Australia, there was not ever going to be growth. Not going to happen. Nothing's happening. Well, it is happening. You drive through Crediton and see what Mr. Palin is doing. He has a 300 lot subdivision behind that first phase. These kind of decisions, these are monumental decisions, but it's really to plan for the future. It's not short term. It's not what's going to happen next week or next year. It takes a while for these investments to pay off. But if these things aren't done properly, properly addressed, you have wasteland south end of Exeter. And you have nothing happening in some of the other communities we've extended sewers. And there's more going on in Grand Bend than even the Tridon, that whether council is completely aware of other opportunities that all are happening out of things like the investment in the sewage plant and the growth components in the plant. That's what you're really discussing. Like there has been rewards from this. And when these developers repay that growth component, it does go back to the users. The users are carrying the cost, not burdening. Like you can say they're paying the cost, but they are carrying this interest and principal payments until a developer develops, pays back, it goes back to the users. So our investments have paid off. And the one that I generally don't like to talk about, but Mayor George always likes to talk about, is the Exeter Hensel pipeline. Because there's a defining moment at council. I was in the council chambers that night when there was a decision made, which way do we go on the Exeter Hensel pipeline? You could go the route of let's upgrade the wells at about $6 million. And there's no growth component. It just fixes up a lot of problems with the well sites and bring the wells into compliance. Or do you spend twice the money and build a pipeline from the water treatment plant across to Exeter? That was a hard one to swallow, but it took a brave council to say, what do I want? Do I want a future or not? And they made that decision and off we are. Now here we are with a water pipeline to Exeter, 100% on lake water, and we have no impediments to growth. They're all on the water side with fire protection. The future was secured by that decision that was made. And that decision was made almost 20 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Giberson. Any other comments? Okay, not seeing. Ms. Masuha-Colson, would you be able to read the recommendation, please?
The South Huron Committee of the Whole received the report and presentation from Don Giberson, General Manager of Infrastructure and Development, redraft cost sharing agreement for the Grand Bend Trunk Sewer Extension, and that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to Council to approve the draft cost sharing agreement in principle, and that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to Council that the Mayor and the Clerk be authorized to sign a cost sharing agreement with Trident Group Limited and Trident Properties Limited for the extension of the Grand Bend Trunk Sewer the Grand Bend Trunk Sewer, subject to approval of an associated budget.
Mover, please. Moved by Councillor Neves, second by Councillor Dietrich. Any discussion? Councillor Vaughn, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so by putting forward this motion at this point, are we basically saying that question period is over? And we're ready to make a vote? Because I did mention I have a number of questions. Don Giberson mentioned he also would, before he answered some of the questions, we needed to go into closed session. Are we actually as a council contemplating making this vote without further answers to questions?
So I'll turn to Ms. Masu Carlson on the process.
Okay, the process after a moving in a seconder is that there can be further discussion, of course. Now, as far as whether or not there's a closed session, that would be a resolution of council. It is something, of course, that could be recommended, but not in this committee of the whole.
Comments, Councilor Plum?
Sorry, the closed piece cannot be recommended?
Oh, the closed session could be recommended from in the committee of the whole, but the closed session would not be in this committee of the whole.
It would be at a later date. Okay. Okay, so I should carry on with my questions.
Feel free. Does anyone want to take a break first before, how long do you think you'll be, Councilor Vaughn?
I don't know for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're here till 7.
How about we take a 10-minute break then? Thank you. Is that okay? Okay, thank you very much. We'll do 10 minutes and be back. And welcome back, everyone. We'll reconvene this meeting and Councillor Vaughn, did you want to proceed? Yeah, no problem. And just so other members of council, if they have any questions, please let me know but go ahead. Councillor Need.
This just might be for later after we've had a chance to ask some more questions, but is it possible that we can split this motion up?
Absolutely. Ms. Basu calls.
I know it's already on the table, but I just wanted to make sure that we could split it up.
Through the chair. Yes, you can split the motion.
Councillor Vaughn, go ahead, please.
Okay, so we had a couple of conversations about cost so far. And so my question here, the first question is really about who will we pay the $600,000 plus cost until such time as future developers in the Port Lake area actually emerge?
Mr. Giberson.
Through you, Mayor Finch, all of the ratepayers will carry that cost until it's repaid by future development.
Okay, so just to clarify, ratepayers, you don't mean ratepayers as in taxation ratepayers, you mean users and users of the sewage systems in all of South Huron.
Mr. Giberson.
Through you, Mayor Finch, that is correct. The sewer users would be carrying those costs until they're repaid.
Okay, so that's everywhere. That's Exeter, Crediton, everywhere there are sewers today. Users, sewer users.
Through you, Mayor Finch, that is correct. The same as all other cost recovery bylaws.
Okay, I'm asking that only because I've had that question asked of me quite a bit in the past week. So thank you for that. Okay, what would be the best way for council to understand how these past sewage projects have actually worked in terms of cost recovery from future development? I know we've approved a number of them in this fashion, but I don't ever recall the outcome actually coming back to council to show us how future development has paid for the remaining part of these systems. It's really hard to understand when we have Watson studies coming up every 5 years and our rates keep going up. So I'm trying to reconcile that in my own mind.
Through you, Mayor Finch, staff can submit a report to council to outline the specific developments and the amount of cost recovery from these bylaws.
Councillor Vaughn.
Okay, all right. Well, so that would be a further motion at another time, I suppose. Okay.
Councillor Oak, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. It's my understanding that our legal counsel is on tonight if we had any questions on the agreement. While they're in attendance, whether it makes sense to ask some questions if anybody has it. Is that
Ms.
Rebecca?
Basu calls and comment.
Yeah, through the chair, that is correct. Dave Woodward is on and available for any questions on the agreement specifically.
Are there any questions for Mr. Woodward at this time? Mr. Woodward, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Are there any questions for Mr. Woodward at this time? Counselor Vaughn, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I only have a comment, and I must admit, over the weekend, most of my focus has been on the need, the capacity, and thoughts around the lack of an official plan. I really haven't gone through the agreement, which is one of the reasons why I also don't support going forward and executing that.
Mr. Woodward, were you able to comment on this agreement?
I can, thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Vaughn, for the question. The agreement itself, it's a cost sharing agreement in which I'll just mention a couple features to give comfort to council should council see fit to move forward at some point, whether in the near future or another time. The agreement contemplates that the funds relating to engineering, for example, before this goes forward, are paid upon the signing of the agreement. And then before the contract's awarded, the entire costs of the Trident share, and I should have said Trident share of the engineering, but the entire cost of Trident share is paid up front before the contract is awarded. So it's a fairly, I mean, to the extent possible, it's a pretty good agreement from the municipality's perspective. The money's up front before you incur material expenditures for the project. The other piece I want to emphasize to council is that the municipality is in control of the agreement, or of the project, I should say. So the municipality will pay the contractor directly, but will also control the project to ensure the municipality gets a project where Solhaven is properly serviced and the oversizing of the pipe meets South Huron's needs. And I think that's important. In some of these cost-sharing agreements, we see sometimes the developer is in control of the project, and with South Huron in control, I think you have the confidence that the public interest is served, and I think that should give a great deal of comfort to council should it wish to move forward. In terms of the other parts of the agreement, in the event that the final numbers exceed the estimates, there's an obligation there, of course, for reimbursement, and those extra costs will be added to the tax roll of Trident for recovery should there be any arrears at any point in the future, because it is the estimated amount of the project, of Trident's share of the project, that is paid up front. So I just wanted to mention that, and the agreement contemplates that it'll be registered on title and will remain an ongoing obligation of not only Trident, but if there's a successor in title, then the subsequent owner will inherit that obligation. And there's a specific provision in there where Trident will be required to have any subsequent owner enter into an agreement to explicitly follow that obligation. So no project is risk-free, of course, but this is a pretty good deal. Many projects we see, a lot of times the developer can take the lead, and those projects and the municipality and the public interest is in the hands of the developer, notwithstanding there might be excellent covenants that the developer gives. This is a situation where South Huron's in control. They have the money, and that's it's designed to protect the municipality and its ratepayers throughout the life of the project and thereafter.
Thank you, Mr. Woodward. Councillor Oak, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks, Dave, for those comments. The one question I had is, and just wanted to explain clear to me is, we're getting the money up front for their share. If there's cost overruns, how does that work as the project goes? Because nowadays in my world and some days there's usually a hidden treasure that you run into, and so there is some extra costs. How is that going to get allocated, and is there a maximum that as far as a cost that is in this agreement?
Mr. Woodward.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor Oak, through you, Mr. Mayor. The agreement contemplates that South Huron is authorized to accept a bid that is not more than 15% above the projected cost, unless Tridon consents to it. And of course, South Huron, as the party awarding the contract, would have to consent to it. And that is a check and balance of the costs, but it does not answer your question fully, of course, because there can be cost overruns as a result of extras and unforeseen circumstances that can occur with the project. So the agreement contemplates that the final share will be based on I'll call it the cost sharing estimate proportion, the proportional share of each party's cost sharing estimate, and which is a 75-25 split, 75 for the developer. Those funds will be invoiced to Tridon. And as I touched on a little bit earlier, if there were arrears, there's a provision in the agreement where those arrears would be added or expressly authorized to be added to the tax roll and collected as municipal taxes as authorized by the Municipal Act. And of course, municipal taxes ultimately it's a pretty good security, and that's the way we've dealt with it. But the payment up front will be based on the contract that's awarded. Okay, so I just want to emphasize that as well. Let's say we're 15% above at the time we award the contract. Then the invoice to Tridon will be not just the estimate, but it'll be the 15% above the estimate to be the actual cost, and they'll have to pay that up front before we award the contract. I mean, I know it doesn't entirely answer the possible problem of cost overruns beyond the contracted price, but anyway, I'll stop there.
And just to confirm, the tax roll you're referring to would go on the Soul Havens tax base alone, not the rest of the municipality.
Absolutely. It's the tax roll of the owner of the property, not a general obligation for any other ratepayer.
Thank you. Mr. Giverson, go ahead, please.
So to help Dave out, in the agreement, in the schedule, and it's actually on the last page, there's $457,600 in provisional and contingency for the unforeseen. And there's a specific allocation of $260,000 for unforeseen, like an unforeseen contingency. So it's been built. So to the best of our ability, there's an allowance in this agreement, in the costing for unforeseen. But Councillor Oak is quite correct. My crystal ball doesn't work too well either.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions at this time before we go back to Councillor Vaughn? Councillor Vaughn, do you have anything extra?
Not for our solicitor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Giverson or members of staff?
Yes, I do have another question. It's not directly cost, but it has to do with the financials. So until such time again as we have future development, is this going to represent another $600,000 worth of debt to the municipality?
Mr. Giberson?
Through you, Mayor Finch, no, this is not debt. We are not proposing to debenture. So it's not municipal debt, doesn't affect the debt borrowing capacity. It's proposed to secure the funding from our existing reserves.
Thank you. Councillor Vaughn?
Yeah, so again, I'm just gonna go a minute back to capital cost sewage projects. We have an awful lot of them over the next 10 years. Interestingly enough, none of them are directed towards the lake shore, no pumping stations for the Grand Bend area on that capital 10-year plan at all. Decommissioning, moving things around, nothing like that. But a lot of money is coming from reserves. So from a reconciliation, and I don't expect that to happen here tonight, but I think that needs to occur. I don't really know that I have a lot more cost questions, but I will just say, sort of in closing to the rest of council, I really think we ought to be thinking about the lack of an official plan in the Port Lake area, the lack of a secondary plan. We did approve one property, but this could be multiple properties. And without any planning, I don't think we're doing the right thing from a municipal planning perspective. So.
Thank you. Mr. Giberson, you had your hand up there. Any comments?
I just wanted to, through you, Mayor Finch, no, I just wanted to respond or comment on the financial end. It is in the 10-year forecast, this project. The effect on the reserves has been considered in the 10-year forecast, and the treasurer is in the best position to answer those questions about what's left available in the reserve. Not tonight, I would never do that, but at a future meeting. So just so council has the confidence that the project is in the current proposed 2024 budget. There is a 10-year forecast, and the impact on the reserves has been considered as part of that 10-year forecast. And it's best that I stop talking about the financials at this point.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vaughn, go ahead.
I just want to add another clarification to what Don was saying there. I definitely know that this particular project is in this year's budget. I'm not missing that. I'm talking about beyond 2024 for the rest of the next 10 years. There's a lot of discussion around pumping stations and such. None of it has to do with the Port Lake planning area whatsoever. That was the only point I was trying to make.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments for staff at this time? Okay, not seeing Councillor Neeb, go ahead, please.
Just more of a question. We have a motion that's on the table. And I look at this as being either two or three recommendations that are to go back to council. And I'm just wondering if we would be able to amend or change potentially the last two to move the draft cost sharing agreement and the cost sharing agreement, the last two paragraphs, to closed session at our next council meeting.
Ms. Carlson, do you want to comment on there? Madam Clerk, do you have a comment when you're ready? The one.
So council could split the recommendation, so you would receive the report, and then if they would like to do a deferral or amendment to the second part of the recommendation, that's an option.
Is that your wish, Councillor Oak, go ahead, please.
I'd second that. And in doing that, I think it sounds like tonight there's some more information that we don't have that might be beneficial for us to have in a closed session from the conversation or the questions that we've had tonight. And it gives some more time to maybe come up with some of the financial side of things. And yeah, I'm just wondering if the closed session to keep things, is it possible to have it for the November 6th council meeting at that time?
Mr. Carlson, comments?
I'll pass that all over to the acting clerk, but I would mention that the wording may need to be more investigate a closed session, because at this time, I don't have the information, and I don't think the clerk does either, to know what section under the Municipal Act it would qualify for. So I can understand that there is a consideration to wanting it to be in closed session. But at this time, I don't have the information to provide assurance that it could go.
Councillor Oak, go ahead, please.
And so, yeah, to investigate the possibility of a closed session, and if so, to have it at our next council meeting.
So if Councillor Neeb, you're making that motion, then I'll just look to you, how you like. to do it.
Yes, what I'm also just thinking this through. In terms of, I guess my concern too is I want to get more information, but I also do not want this to slow down the process as well. So I'm wondering whether these recommendations need to be made to move forward to council in addition to having that conversation, and that's where the final decision would be made. I'm just thinking process, and I'm just concerned about slowing it down.
Okay, Madam Clerk, comments?
So that is an option for council or a committee to consider if you wanted to split the motion. So you receive the report, and then the second two recommendations, you'd vote on that. Whether that goes back to the next council meeting available. And then at that time, you could make a further recommendation when that committee of the whole recommendation then comes to council for discussion.
Councillor Neeb?
So we'd be making the recommendations that are on the table currently, in addition to meeting in closed session to investigate further. Am I understanding?
I turn to the Madam Clerk.
So that could be something if it was to amend the motion to have that brought forward at a later date once staff have had time to investigate for closed session, unless the CO has anything to add.
Mr. Carlson?
I would agree that would give us room if you would refer these to council to a later meeting. And we will investigate to see whether or not that we can put a closed session onto the next agenda. At this point, I can't say for sure that there can be one. I think it needs further investigation.
Councillor Neeb, comment?
So let's say there's nothing to investigate. So would this come back at our November 6th meeting, or would this be in late November?
Mr. Carlson, comment?
It could come back to the 6th meeting as a resolution. Yes, definitely.
Okay. Yep. I'm willing to do that.
Okay, so do you have a wording you'd like to use then in that regard?
I've spoken enough tonight. I think I'm gonna defer to Councillor Vaughn as to what we would want to investigate in closed session.
I'm not the one who brought up closed session. Okay, that was Mr. Giberson. And I'm really confused as to what is being asked for right now as an amendment. Definitely everything that we've been talking about tonight is not qualifying under closed session. I don't know precisely what is, but I would say that definitely I would think that further discussion on the actual legal agreement is actually a closed session item, and probably made sense to have it there from the get-go, but we are where we are. I believe Mr. Giberson was talking about capacity for the Oakwood pumping station, and that the questions I was asking around that about being led to believe we had capacity, but maybe we don't have capacity, and what happened there. And I'm paraphrasing, that was some time ago. I think at that point, Mr. Giberson was saying we should move into closed session.
Mr. Giberson, you have a comment?
So the 14 elements that in the municipal act, and I'm trying to memorize them. The reason I put that forward is there's potential litigation. But the clerk and CAO have no other details, but that's why I put that forward.
Okay, thank you. So currently we have a mover and a seconder for the original recommendation. And asked to split the recommendations out. Would we like to proceed with just the first one right now? If you've moved in, you've seconded, Councillor Dietrich. And then we'll go back to, if we're going to do an amendment on the other two. Is that correct, Councillor Neebe? You're happy with that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so Madam Clerk, is that satisfactory if we proceed with the first paragraph of the recommendation?
Yes, so the recommendation would be that South Huron Committee of the Whole receives the report and presentation from Don Giberson, General Manager of Infrastructure and Development, regarding draft cost sharing agreement for the Grand Bend Trunk Sewer Extension, moved by Member Neebe and seconded by Member Dietrich.
Are there any discussions on that? Call the question. All in favor? And that carries with 6. Thank you. I'll turn to Madam Clerk for process where we go. And Deputy Mayor, did you have a comment at all at this point? I believe you had your hand up. No? Okay. Madam Clerk.
Nope. Okay.
And while we're waiting, we just don't know if we're going to go past the 3-hour limit. So perhaps we could have a motion to extend past curfew. Has to be unanimous. Councillor Oak, Councillor Neebe, all in favor? That carries with 6. Thank you. Or up to 1 hour. Thank you.
So the second part, if you're looking to motion to amend, the second 2 is to defer to a future council meeting to permit staff time to investigate for closed meeting protocol.
Is that the entire motion?
That would be to amend. And then the full motion would be that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to council to defer to a future council meeting to permit staff time to investigate a closed meeting. And then it would be for the approval of the draft cost sharing agreement in principle, and that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to council that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign a cost sharing agreement with Trident Group Ltd. and Trident Properties Ltd. for the extension of the Grand Bend Trunk Sewer, subject to an approval of an associated budget.
Councillor Neebe, is that your motion? And Councillor Oak, you were the second, or you mentioned you second that? Okay, it's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Vaughn.
I'm not quite sure I follow that motion in terms of the second part of it. I understand the closed session but what was the second part again? I don't get that.
Madam Clerk, could you just read it again, please?
So it'd be a motion to amend, so it would defer the recommendations to a future council meeting to permit staff to investigate closed meeting protocol. So that would be deferring the South Huron Committee of the Whole recommending to council the approval of draft cost sharing agreement in principle, And that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to council that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign a cost-sharing agreement with Trident Group Ltd. And Trident Properties Ltd. For the extension of a Grand Bend trunk sewer, subject to approval of associated budget.
Councillor Vaughn?
Okay, okay, I'm sorry, maybe it's the lateness of the hour, but that second piece was being deferred to a future council meeting as well, or was it being recommended that it be brought? I'm not sure I understand that. I really don't.
I'll defer to CAO.
Okay, through the chair. And I guess I do have kind of concerns about the motion as well, because unless I don't know, we kind of got an idea of what maybe we could have for closed session. It might be easier for council just to, at this point, there's a mover and a seconder because it was split on those last two resolutions. So perhaps it's easier now at this point, don't want to even maybe vote on it, maybe refer these resolutions to a future council meeting. And then the other part I think is necessary to know is what is going to be discussed in closed. And as noted before, the agreement itself is an open document. So it's not in closed. It's like we're past that point. It's only the discussions at this point, and they would have to come under a section of the Municipal Act.
Deputy Mayor, comment?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what we're looking for in a closed session that we're not getting now. I don't know how staff's going to bring something back that at least that's where my thoughts are. So maybe I'm missing something here.
Okay, and Mr. Giverson, comment, or if you have nothing, that's fine. Councillor Oak, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. To Deputy Mayor, there might be some extenuating circumstances that we're not aware of that why we need to move forward or not move forward with this project. That we're not aware that. So that's all I'm thinking, why it's being investigated, because of what Dawn mentioned, that there potentially could be some litigation that we need to be aware of, sort of thing.
Mr. Giverson, comment?
Through you, Mayor Finch. So my concern is specific to the available capacity in the Oakwood Links pumping station. Very specific to potential litigation. No other issues, no other concerns.
Okay, Councillor Neeb, question? I see, no? Deputy?
So therefore, that has absolutely nothing to do with what we're discussing here about a pipeline going in. That is a separate situation.
Councillor Vaughn?
I disagree, because I think it absolutely has to do with what we're talking about here tonight. We're talking about need. We're talking about capacity. We're talking about planning for Port Blake and having a pipe determine our future. I think it absolutely all fits together.
Councillor Oak?
And I agree with Councillor Vaughn that we need to know those details, because that area could be considered part of the future development if there's something that is in that situation. So it was part of that side of the road was part of the future development as well. So I think we definitely need to know that.
Deputy, go ahead, please.
Mr. Woodward, if you do you have anything that you could bring upon this that's not going to affect our closed session that's legal to talk about?
Mr. Woodward?
Thanks very much. My role primarily here today was to comment on the agreement. Just in terms of closed session, I'm not familiar with the issue of the Oakwood Links and potential litigation there, but there's no question that potential litigation is a possible reason for for discussions in closed session under the Municipal Act. So insofar as that is pertinent to this decision, then if council wants to go there and discuss something that might involve some litigation, I'd say that's possible, but I would tread very carefully, because once you stop talking about the litigation and you start discussing things relating to this development and this agreement, you're definitely no longer able to remain in closed session. So that any closed session discussion of the Oakwood Links matter or any litigation, we would have to be very careful to make sure that that discussion is that any closed session would have to be restricted to that.
Point well taken. Thank you very much, Mr. Woodward. Any other comments? Okay, I turn to our clerk to see where we are with this at this point in time.
So if council was looking to refer, they could refer those two recommendations, which I'll read, to a future council meeting. So that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to council to approve the draft cost sharing agreement in principle, and that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to council that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign a cost sharing agreement with Trident Group Ltd. And Trident Properties Ltd. For the extension of the Grand Bend Trunk Sewer, subject to approval of an associated budget. The deferral would be to prevent staff time to investigate closed meeting protocol.
Thank you. Comments? So we have a mover and a seconder. There's no further discussion. We all understand the recommendation. Okay, call the question. All in favor? And there's 3. And opposed?
May
Yes, let's
we
vote.
have a recorded vote?
Yes, we may. Go ahead. Councillor Oak, go ahead.
Yeah, just before we vote, just a clarification. So if this vote isn't approved, that basically then it refers back to these two recommendations as presented in the agenda tonight?
Madam Clerk?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So as a motion to refer to a future council meeting, that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to council to approve the draft cost sharing agreement in principle, and that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to council that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign a cost sharing agreement with Trident Group Ltd. And Trident Properties Ltd. For the extension of the Grand Bend Trunk Sewer, subject to an approval of associated budget. And that referral is to permit staff time to investigate closed meeting protocol. Councillor Vaughn has called for a recorded vote. Member Dietrich,
No.
Member Neeb,
Yes.
Member Vaughn, Member Oak,
Yes.
Member Finch,
Yes.
and Member Dietrich.
Yes.
That carries 4-2.
Thank you. Anything further, Madam Clerk?
No.
Ms. Masuda Collison, number 5.
Okay, that South Huron Committee of the Whole does now adjourn at 7:04 p.m.
Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Neeb. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? And that carries with 6. Thank you very much. And thank you for all that attended tonight.